Okay, my friends, good morning. Today we're going to learn a little bit about two things: the Alamo and the difference between a first-person account and a second-hand account. We talked a little bit about this before when we were talking about Thanksgiving, but this will be a little bit of a reminder. And it'll also teach us a little bit about the history of the Southwest region for today. Okay, so you may have heard about the Alamo before. You may wonder if it's an exciting thing to learn about today, so I'm just going to show you a quick video and see if you agree with me that this is a pretty exciting topic. Look at this.
I'd like to ask each of you what it is you value so highly that you are willing to fight and possibly die for.
It is my conviction that holding this fort is the key to defending our colonies. As goes the Alamo, so goes Texas. When I return, we'll get a home of our own. I promise.
Davy Crockett, the Lion of the West.
If Santana and his bunch drops by, we'll lick them like fine salt.
In the fight for Texas, they were a few hundred men who were inexperienced at war.
If it was just me, simple old David from Tennessee, I might drop over that wall and take my chances. But that Davy Crockett fella, they're all watching him.
They faced thousands of Mexican soldiers from one of the greatest armies ever assembled.
You live 5 more years, you just might be a great man. I think I will probably have to settle for what I am now.
If you wish to stay here, in the Alamo, we will show the world what patriots are made of.
Viva Santana!
You will remember this battle. Remember each minute, each second, till the day that you die. That is for tomorrow, gentlemen. For today, remember the Alamo.
Okay, you would agree it's a pretty exciting story, and it's a great story, and it's an important story in the history of the Southwest. It is the reason why Texas became Texas, and eventually Texas became part of the United States. But we're also going to talk a little bit about the difference between a first-person account and a second-hand account. So my visual here is that a first-person account is information that was gathered from the person who was actually at the battle. So somebody who actually saw what took place, okay? And they wrote down what happened. If you remember our Thanksgiving lesson, there was only one first-hand account of what took place on the first Thanksgiving. Fortunately for us, we have several different first-person accounts of what happened at the Alamo, and we have numerous second-hand accounts of what happened. A second-hand account is that the person who saw the event take place talks to a person or writes down some information, and then that next person takes that information, this is the ear, or they hear it or they see it, and then they take the information and they write that down, and they have an account of what took place. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is the benefit of a first-person account and the benefit of a second-person account, a second-hand account, and some of the differences. So hopefully you can see this okay. This is a PowerPoint presentation, and it talks a little bit about the history of the Alamo. So I'm just going to scroll through here and tell you what happened, when it happened, and all that good stuff. Okay? So this is an outline of the Alamo itself. Remember, an Alamo is a mission. A mission is basically the original use of a mission is to spread religion. So it's a church surrounded by a bunch of other buildings, surrounded by a wall. And that's where we found our Texas revolutionaries, people that wanted to become Texas to be its own country. At first it was ruled by Mexico, and then they wanted to become their own country. This is a picture, an actual photo of the Alamo well after the battle. And here's another ground plan of the Alamo that shows what was there and things like that. Okay, here's a picture of the well. It's still there. The Alamo still stands. Here's our first source. When you're doing a research project, you need sources, and this is our first source. It is from a person who wrote the history of Texas from its first settlement in 1685 to its annexation of the United States. So from the time that it became to the time that it became one of our 50 states. So this is like a textbook, okay? This is a second-hand account. This person that wrote this was not at the Alamo, but he has studied the Alamo, and he has gotten information from first-hand accounts and other second-hand accounts and created a summary of what took place. Okay, and if I scroll down some more, we have a little bit more information. Now, they're talking about some of the numbers that took place. Part of the reason why we remember the Alamo was because it was such a lopsided battle, so to speak. It was only a couple hundred Texas soldiers and a couple thousand Mexican soldiers. So there was no way that the American soldiers or the Texas soldiers were going to win this battle. It was about 188 men under Colonel Travis, who was a Texas colonel, versus several thousand under the direction of General Santa Anna from the Mexican army. Okay, so that's basically now this is our first piece of our first source that is a first-hand account. This is an actual letter from William Travis, from Colonel Travis, and this is important because not only do we get facts about what took place, but we also get to see a little bit about what somebody was thinking when they were there and what kind of person General Travis was, so we can make some inferences about what we think about this guy. So he writes, "Fellow citizens and compatriots, I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna. I have sustained a continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours and have not lost a man." So they have surrounded the Alamo, and they want these guys to surrender. So what they're doing is they're shooting cannons from a distance at the Alamo, hoping that the people are going to surrender instead of fighting. He says, "The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion, otherwise the garrison are to be put to the sword if the fort is taken." So they said, okay, you can surrender, or we're going to have to get in there and we're going to have to take you all out. So this is how he responds. "I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. Then I call on you in the name of liberty and patriotism and everything dear to the American character to come to our aid." Okay, so with this letter, we learn a little bit of something about Colonel Travis. Okay, so I'm just going to write down his name here. And what do we know about Colonel Travis? Okay, he is a patriot. He doesn't want to give up, right? You might say he's stubborn, right? He has a little bit of a hot streak, right? They sent to him a cannon, so he sent one back, but he won't give up. Okay, so we learn that from his own words, which is really important. Okay, the next part of the letter, here's another copy at the end of the letter, and the next part of the letter says, "I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his own honor and that of his country. And then it says, P.S. The Lord is on our side. When the enemy appeared in sight, we had not 3 bushels of corn, but we have found some since then. So this tells me a little that he is not only brave, but he's also religious. We get to see little parts of him, right? That you would not necessarily get in a textbook. So let's continue down, and we'll learn a little bit more about the battle that takes place and who's telling us what's going on. Let's see. The next one, History of Texas. Now this is another textbook, but this is a pictorial history of Texas. Okay, this is not a textbook that you may get at in your college or in your high school. It might be one that is at the library. It's a little more dramatic because it's a pictorial, so they're trying to get your attention a little bit more. So when authors start to do that, they start to play around a little bit with the facts. So you got to be careful about that. Okay. It says, after declaring his determination to sell his life as dearly as possible and drawing a line with his sword, Travis asked all who were willing to fight with him to form on the line. With one exception, all fell into the ranks, and even Bowie, who was dying with the consumption, had his cot carried to the line. Okay, so he told everybody, and you saw that in the video, that the odds were not good, but if you want to stay and fight with me, come line up with me. And everybody except for one person did, and even one guy who was sick and on a bed still lined up. So here's another. And that's part of the reason why we remember this event, is because they knew the outcome and they still did not surrender. So it shows unbelievable bravery. Okay, so this is also from the History of Texas textbook. So this is a second-hand account of what took place. Okay, it says his troops exceeded 4,000 in numbers, the most of whom had been refreshed during the time that they spent there. The Texans, on the contrary, were worn down by incessant watching and labor within the walls. This was not a one-day fight. These guys had been surrounded for, I think, 30 days or so before the Mexicans decided to attack. So they surrounded them for a long time. Here is a picture, an illustration of General Santa Anna of the Mexican Army. We get to see what he looks like. We get to see what their clothes were. And the people that made the video that we watched earlier had to do this kind of research to make sure that this guy in the video, in the movie, was dressed appropriately. So this is important stuff to have. Now, we're going to get into secondhand accounts and how much you need to look at them with a wary eye, and you need to look at them to see if it's showing what really happened, or are they showing a dramatized version, like a movie version. So this one is really a dramatized picture. It's really trying to get your attention more than it is trying to give you information. So a researcher would not really use this too much, because quite honestly, the person that drew this picture was not there, so it's not a first-person account, and is probably not sticking to the facts very closely. This was also from that pictorial History of Texas, so we know it's a little bit more of trying to sell books than do hard research. Here's just another picture of the Alamo later on. The Alamo took place in March of 1836. I'll write that down next time we get up there. March of 1836. They decided they've had enough. We're going to go in there and we're going to fight. And it didn't take long because it was thousands, 4,000 versus 200, right? So it doesn't take long for the inevitable to take place. Now this is quite a wild picture. We have lots of fighting going on, lots of mayhem. This is from another source, and this source is called Texas Stories. Okay, Texas Stories tells me that it's not a textbook at all. It's really just a almost fictional version. It's a historically fictional version of what took place. So they take the basics of what happened and then they make their own stories up. So you really have to be careful when you see something like that, okay? And there's an actual picture of Davy Crockett who was there. You might have heard his name before. Davy Crockett was there, and he died along with all the other Texas soldiers. Let's see if we can get to some real facts about what took place. Oh, this one is also from Texas Stories. Watch how different this recollection of the story takes place. When you're hearing this, ask yourself, is this what really happened, or is this somebody's fictional version of what took place? And you'll see with the use of vocabulary words to try to make it as dramatic as possible that we shouldn't be taking this for research. It says Crockett with several others were driven to a corner of the church where, with their backs against the walls, they fought with the fury of tigers. Their faces were begrimed with powder, and blood trickled from many wounds. Crockett had a frightful gash across his forehead. Piles of Mexicans, dead and dying, lay around them. When they could fight no longer, Crockett and 5 others were taken prisoner and carried before General Santa Anna. General Castrillon, who captured them, was a brave man, and he loved bravery in others. He wanted to save their lives. He said to General Santa Anna, "Sire, here are 6 prisoners. What shall we do with them?" "Did I not tell you that no prisoners were to be taken?" shouted Santa Anna in rage. "To death with them." This cruel order was immediately carried out. The last Texan had fallen, and with him the Alamo. Now, there is no evidence that that conversation ever took place. And the description of the fighting is impossible to confirm because the person who wrote that was not there. He took the facts and he put that together and said, that's probably what happened, right? Crockett was probably a really good fighter because he's Davy Crockett. But there's no evidence, so we can't use that for research. We got to be careful when we're researching. Okay, this is from the history book. So this is from the textbook. So this is going to be less exciting, but more fact-driven. It says the defenders of Texas did not retreat, but they lay there in obedience to the command of their country, and in that obedience the world has witnessed among men no greater moral sublimity. Okay, so it's talking about what happened at the end. Now, that's not all we have for sources. We have another source here. This is a first-hand account from none other than General Santa Anna. This is important because he was on the Mexican side. So let me get to the text of it. This is interesting stuff. It says, let's see. That conflict of arms was bloody because the chief Travis, who commanded the forces of the Alamo, would not enter into any capitulation. He would not give up. And his responses were insulting. Do you remember when he said he responded with a cannonball? He said his responses were insulting, which made it imperative to assault the fort before it could be reinforced by others who were marching in. The obstinacy of Travis and his soldiers was the cause of death of the whole of them, for not one would surrender. The struggle lasted more than 2 hours, and until the ramparts were scaled by our soldiers. So he's telling a completely different story here, isn't he? Okay? He is talking about Travis as being obstinate and rude, right? And he is responsible for the deaths of his soldiers. That's what Santa Anna is claiming in his letter, right? 2 people, both there, both have entirely different views of what took place, right? Okay. Let's see if I can find, I think that's the last slide. Nope, here's the last slide. Now, I told you before that this was a memorable battle, and that we talk about it all the time, and that we're lucky enough that we have plenty of information to go by, to research it, and to come up with what really took place. This is a nice little ending that tells us why we remember the Alamo so much. It says, the defense of the Alamo by Travis is one of the most splendid instances of bravery and noble devotion to the cause of one's country on the pages of history. In other words, he cared more about his country and becoming Texas than he did about his own life, and so did all the other 187 other people. Okay? So that really is why we remember it. They knew that they were outgunned, outmanned dramatically, and there was nothing they could do about it. And they still stayed in there and did the best they could do. It says the example of high and elevated heroism that they left behind was of priceless value and constituted a legacy, the benefits of which will last while Texas has a name. It nerved at the heart and the arm of every Texan. Now, we have a phrase that says you lost the battle but won the war. That was partially created by this event. They did lose the Battle of the Alamo, but because they showed such bravery, and because it was felt that Santa Anna did not treat us well, that it says it moved the hearts and arms of every Texan. It means it really ticked everybody off, and it really got everybody working together, and it made the Texas Army even bigger and stronger than what it was before. And they eventually beat Mexico and became their own country. And a lot of the credit goes to the people that were at the Alamo. So to get back to first-hand versus second-hand accounts, okay, to get back to that, I'm going to say March 1836. Don't forget that. But to get back to these first-person and second-person accounts, it's fantastic that we have both. But what I want you to remember is you can't rely on one or the other. You need to have a balance when you're researching. As you go on to middle school, high school, college, you need a good balance of both in order to have a balanced and accurate research project. The first-person account is great, but as you already learned, Travis's first-person account was vastly different than Santa Anna's first-person account. And why is that? Because they're looking at it from different points of view. And when we talked about that, when we talked about Thanksgiving, the guy who did the first-person account only knew so much. He could only see so much. He only felt so much. He felt certain ways, and his account will show how he felt about other people. Same thing with Travis. Travis is trying to tell people what's going on from his point of view only, and you cannot do research from one point of view. Okay? Second-hand accounts are limited because they weren't there, right? But they have the benefit of taking in everybody's first-person accounts and trying to figure out what is real. What is the real part, okay? And what is probably somebody's personal view, okay? So they can keep that out. The other limit to second-hand accounts is that you have to look at the motive of why they're writing it. Are they writing it to sell books? Because if they are, they're going to play a little loose with the actual facts. But if they're writing a textbook, they need to be fact-driven. So you really want to find textbooks if you're going to do